Hey there, Mama. Welcome back to another episode of the Working Mama podcast. When you look at gender equality and gender diversity in organisations, the statistics don't lie. Women make up 47.9% of all employed persons in Australia, but the workforce participation rate is 62.1% for women and 70.4% for men. And generally as well, women are more in flexible or part-time roles. The male-dominated industries, where 40% or less of the workforce are women, include construction, mining and transport, whereas female-dominated industries, where 60% or more of the workforce are women, include healthcare and social assistance, education and training. Then when it comes round to leadership, women hold only 17.6% of chair positions and 31.2% of directorships, and they only represent 19.4% of CEOs and 34.5% of key management personnel. The gender pay gap for full-time average weekly ordinary earnings is 13.8% in favour of men. Why am I explaining some of these statistics? Well, because I'm sure that you work in a male-dominated environment or have instances where you may walk into a room and you may be on the minority. This week on the podcast, I'm speaking with Rebecca Bangura. She is someone who I have got to know through the journey of Working Mama. She's been a previous member of the Working Mama Village, but also now she is a speaker, coach, facilitator that focuses on the property and construction market because she wants to support more females work in these male-dominated spaces. And she's also the host of Building Up Leaders in Property podcast. This is an absolutely great chat with Rebecca. Her and I have a very much kindred spirits in this sense. We're both very passionate about supporting women in male-dominated workplaces, but also supporting working mothers. If you love this episode, definitely if you could refer it on to a friend, leave a rating and review, that would be sensational. Also be sure to check out Rebecca's podcast as well. So let's get into today's episode. Welcome to the Working Mama podcast, a show that provides real-world tips, tricks and advice to all working mamas on how they can have a career, family and hopefully one day break the glass ceiling. Welcome, Rebecca, to the Working Mama podcast. How's your day going so far?
It is going really well. I'm very excited to be here with you.
I'm very excited to have you on. We've been, I guess, business friends and working mum friends for a few years now. You're also a previous member of the Working Mama Village, but we've been interacting with each other for a while. Never actually met in person, which we really need to one day. So next time I'm in Sydney, I'm going to look you up. For those that don't know you, how would you best describe yourself?
I am a leadership coach who works with women in property and construction and other male-dominated industries to help them elevate their leadership style, balance all the things of work, family, personal lives, and really have impact within their industry.
Amazing. And what's been your career journey so far?
So I funnily started my career in marketing and very quickly realized that I hated it and it was not where I saw myself going. But in my first job out of uni, I started working in projects and I found that I absolutely loved project management. And that led me into the property and construction industry. And in as much as a way as I hated marketing, I absolutely loved construction. I loved the idea of building something from the ground up and really the amount of thought and detail and attention that goes into creating the spaces we live and work in. So I spent about almost 2 decades in that space, but somewhere along the way, I had a bit of an existential crisis and realized that I didn't know what the next step for me in my career was. It was quite daunting, very much in a space where I would often be the only woman in the room and very few female role models. And I went on a bit of a journey of personal discovery and in the process spoke to a lot of other women who I realized had the same challenge. And I think, uniquely to male-dominated spaces, we do face a whole bunch of challenges in our careers and they generally coincide with, often our 30s when we're starting to think about families and life is getting more complex. And doing that work for me really led me to first of all, push ahead in my property career, but also really allowed me to push ahead and get direction in my career. But it also opened up the door of leadership development and coaching and support for women in this space. And, after 2 decades in the industry, I transitioned into leadership coaching and development a couple of years ago.
Amazing. And I know I also work in a very male dominated environment, and I have for most of my career. And it is certainly different walking into a boardroom or a meeting with all males and you're the only female in the room. I know early on in my career, I would actually think about what I was wearing that day, generally wearing, say, pants, and even trying to prepare myself mentally. Now I'm very used to it and I can herd the cats a bit more, but it really is different, isn't it? And in male dominated environments.
Absolutely. And, for me, it was always going to a job site. Like, was I wearing pants on days I would go to site, or, because there's nothing worse than showing up in a skirt on site, which, I mean, it's kind of funny, but, they're things you have to think about. And I also really realized after a long time that every time I stepped into a situation where I was the only woman or one of the few women, it almost felt like I was putting on this kind of suit of armor and,
I know
suiting
exactly
up,
what you mean. Yeah.
right? And it's like, you've got to put your game face on and you've got to show up and you really think about not only your appearance a lot more, but also the things you say and how you say things. So instead of being fully present and leaning into my strengths, I would often find myself kind of curtailing my behavior and trying to read the room so much more than my male colleagues in order to make sure I presented okay. And I think that is, the unspoken burden that women face in these spaces.
I think as well that you feel like you don't want to make a mistake. So I don't know about you, but you want to be prepared. You want to know the answers, because it's very easy to get that, probably that criticism and a few pegs down, as opposed to, oh yeah, she knows her stuff. I feel like we've got to prove ourselves a little bit more than accepted. I work in an engineering space, so male engineer, you instantly know it. Whereas a female, I'm not an engineer, but I've worked in the space for a while. You've got to earn your credibility a lot more.
Yeah. And, the research proves it, right? The standard that women are held to in terms of expertise is much higher than male counterparts. So it's not just us imagining that we need to prove ourselves and really know our stuff. That is also the expectation of those around us. And I think, as women in these spaces, what we often do is we spend a lot of time preparing, making sure we do understand everything and that we can confidently show up and talk to issues. And whilst that's great to be prepared, we can also get stuck in the habit of over preparing and trying to appear perfect in every situation because we, feel that we need to, and we're being judged more harshly. And the result is we're not necessarily focusing on the things that will move us ahead or have the biggest impact in terms of our role in our career.
Yeah. And have you also noticed some of the conversations are different? I always notice that, say, if I'm at a networking event with mostly males, I'll talk a lot of sport, and I'm lucky that I've got a real interest in sport, that it does help me. But I wouldn't necessarily have, and when I meet females at the same networking function, I won't be talking about sport necessarily. It's interesting as well, the way that women and men network is different, but also the conversations you generally have are also so different.
Yeah. And I think, men tend to build networks and relationships by being in the presence of other people. So they can form a really strong relationship by being side by side with someone. So that might be playing a sport or watching a sport or, being in the same room. Whereas women tend to build relationships in terms of our emotional connection and our engagement with each other. And so what happens is women tend to, with other women, build these really deep relationships, which is great. But for most of us, particularly working mums, we're juggling a lot of the things. We don't necessarily have enough time in our lives for the people we're already close to, let alone making new friends and, deep relationships. And so we actually don't create really effective, leverageable, if that's a word, or networks that we can leverage, because we tend to focus on that deep connection, whereas men are much happier and comfortable with loose connections. And that loose connection, which is built around who won at AFL this week or the Olympics or whatever is going on. Those relationships are often what open doors, what create opportunities, and what push people ahead in their careers. And traditionally, as women, we're not great at doing that. And so, I'm a really big advocate for how do we create more loose connections in our professional lives. And, that's not to say that we can only talk about sport with other women and superficial things, but it's about not necessarily needing to invest too much emotionally and time-wise into these relationships, but still being able to leverage off of them.
So how can we do that? Because I know as well, I even had it a couple of weeks ago, met another female and things like that. But if I told some males about that connection, I actually made a sales introduction between two people. People almost look at me as though I've got two heads of, well, how do you know her? And like, you're not in a sales role, and what's to you to actually even have a network? So it's really interesting of a male's perception of, oh, well, you two actually know each other. And also males won't necessarily go up to a female and start a conversation, but then females will. But I've experienced the same credibility isn't always given if you actually maybe be able to do the sales introductions and things as well.
Yeah, well, again, I think particularly in the male-dominated spaces, it's much easier to see women within a particular box, within a particular role, and with quite clearly defined boundaries. And so for you, stepping into something that may be, an opportunity for a sale or a sales introduction is just sort of out of character, and people don't necessarily know how to respond to that. And that very much falls into quite often as well, the gender stereotypes that we have, right? Women are about kind of creating relationships, and, we see women sort of exuding more soft skills, so to speak, rather than being able to do hard-hitting sales roles. And so people just, it's a bit of a discombobulation. People just don't know how to respond to it. And I think the best way we can do that is to really just let the situation speak for itself. So not to overcompensate, not to necessarily fall into the trap of trying to explain ourselves. And I think quite often just saying, well, look, here's an introduction. I thought this might be valuable to you, and just leaving it there can be really powerful. And it forces the other person to either kind of take or leave the opportunity, rather than kind of needing to explain how the relationship came to be, or, overcompensating in our explanations.
Yeah. And you mentioned before about the loose connections. What can we do as females to help with those? And because, as you said, we're working mums, and often networking functions after work aren't really our jam. We really need to get home. There's a bit of mum guilt also about being away from the family and things like that. So we all know in business at times, it's not necessarily about what you know, it's also about who you know. So in very male-dominated environments, how can we create those connections? And I know LinkedIn's a really good place and a good platform, but also those interpersonal ones are also really important.
Yeah. So I think it's about whenever you meet someone, and it doesn't need to be in a networking situation. It may be meeting someone through a personal connection. It may be meeting someone in a professional setting, in a meeting or a pitch, for example. It's actually following up and building on those relationships. So we don't necessarily need to go out of our way to form more connections. They often happen organically, but what we don't do is we don't follow up on them. We kind of let these opportunities pass us by. So it's really quite helpful to get in the habit of, almost on a weekly basis, thinking about who are the people I've interacted with, who are the people that I either felt connected to, right? There might be a natural synergy or a natural connection. It may be about people who strategically make sense for you to know. And then taking the time to think about, how will I foster those relationships? And as you said, LinkedIn is such a brilliant tool. I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn, but we need to use it intentionally. It's not just about connecting. It's not just about collecting connections. It's about forming real relationships. So that may be actually checking in on people and having almost like an intention and a calendar to do that. And it may just be setting aside an hour once a month to think about, okay, I'm going to touch base with 3 people who, are strategic connections, or are people I would like to just check in on, and really intentionally forming those relationships. And again, it doesn't need to be a huge time commitment. It doesn't need to be, oh, I've reached out, so now we need to catch up for lunch. It can just be, hi, Karina, I was thinking of you. I just wanted to reach out and see how you're going. Is there anything I can do to help you? Let me know. And that offer of, how can I help you? How can I support you? It's really important so that we actually open the doors to communication, to opportunities, and to being invested in each other's career journey over the long term, not just short-term transactions.
Yeah, so important. And obviously you do a lot of work with females in male-dominated environments. What would you say are some of those real systematic challenges that they experience in the workplace as opposed to, say, maybe female dominated environments? And I know that we shouldn't probably differentiate, but you and I both know, and I've also worked in more female orientated environments, there is a bit of a difference. And so how can we work to overcome those? And I guess also, what are those barriers?
Look, there's a lot, and I probably won't bore you by going through
We
all
can,
of them today.
we can do so much on this.
We could talk about this for weeks. But I think, perhaps just to talk to a few of the key ones. So I think when we talk about the maternal wall, a maternal tax is obviously a big one. Now, when we think about the maternal wall, that's really talking about as soon as women are perceived as being of childbearing age or potentially interested in that, then that can often become a block in terms of their career and their opportunities. And that kind of manifests in two ways. So one is that people perceive us as having a different agenda and being more focused on, perhaps having a family and that side of things. So that can limit our options because of people's perception of us. But it can also, and I see this a lot, impact how women show up at work. So often we kind of self-impose that image on ourselves. And an example of that would be, someone who is thinking about starting a family, not going for the promotion, not putting themselves out there because they perceive that, down the track, they will be taking maternity leave and they don't want to let the organization down and they don't want to be perceived negatively. So they don't put themselves out there. And, no one knows what will happen in life. I mean, for me, it took me years to fall pregnant and it was a really long journey. And I think, gosh, if I'd put my career on pause, waiting for something that, ended up taking 3 or 4 years, it's a huge impact on my career. And honestly, the truth for women is you want to get as high as you can before you go on parental leave so that you start from a strong base. And that's really important that we make sure we show up for ourselves, fully invested in our career while we're there.
Yeah. And it's almost it's almost going into that slip lane for maternity and then back in as well. Because as it is, it's harder to, I guess, start from a lower base and then work it up as you become a mum. And I know that sounds harsh, but unfortunately it's reality.
Yeah. And also if you think about your career, right? The first 5 years after you graduate or enter the workforce, you are just learning at an exponential rate. Everything is new. You are just picking up new skills constantly. Then that next 5 years, you're really building your experience and honing your expertise. And so kind of at that 10-year mark, which kind of coincides for most people around their 30s, when most people are starting to think about having children, you've actually become an expert in your field. You're really proficient. You're highly valuable to your organization doing what you do because you can, be left alone and you'll get on and you'll do the job and you'll do it well. And so there's kind of that sweet spot where organizations almost kind of want you to stay there because you're a really good operator, but you're also at that point of thinking about other things. And as we said before, life is starting to get a bit more complex with other factors as well. And if we kind of leave ourselves in that position, rather than stepping into that next level, which is quite often around management or leadership, and it's less about being the expert and having that level of mastery of everything. And it's more about being able to process information and rely on the right people and build that skill of leadership and people management that becomes really vital and opens up the opportunities for more senior positions.
Yeah, 100%. And so if women don't, I guess, have that self-belief and things like that, what is the impact? And are you seeing that, is that one of the contributing factors to not as many women in, leadership positions as well? Because I know in male-dominated environments, they are hungry for more women and more female leaders. And sometimes they're like, but are looking around, they haven't been climbing the rung. And I know, as you're saying, when they're going off, say, parental leave, they're not necessarily coming back. It is
Yeah.
also then the organization needs to support women in this place, and also, I guess, have your champions and create that environment as well to make it comfortable for females.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that is where we see it's quite, we talk about it, being the broken rung, right? And, women aren't taking that next step in their career into those management positions. And then, as you said, quite often they won't return back into the industry, won't return with that depth of experience and expertise that they have. And we see the leaky pipeline, occur where all of this great talent just, dribbles out of the industry over time. And, and this is where we have, again, in male-dominated spaces, this real question of how do we not only attract women into the industry, and that's obviously a conversation that needs to start at primary school level around what roles are available to women and,
100%. Yeah.
what girls are good at and what boys are good at, and, kind of breaking down these gender norms that we certainly grew up with. But then it's about how do we keep women in these roles? So how do we retain them and how do we develop them so that they step into these leadership roles, so that we have representation at all levels of our organizations that includes women? Because that's also where we see the cultural shift, right? And, organizations that have women in leadership, or a significant proportion of women in leadership, generally report better cultures. And, that is vitally important, that is vitally important, especially in industries like construction, where we have high suicide rates, often very toxic behaviors. We need to see that shift in terms of the culture. And so we need to, it really will benefit everyone by having more women in those roles. And that starts by, first of all, acknowledging the challenges, right? Really being open about it. And it's not about having the quick fix, right? We know there's no easy solution that will kind of tick the box and make everything okay.
This
or
is the
make
long game.
everything equal. It is the long game. And there are going to be lots of missteps along the way. And, I say this all the time to particularly male leaders that I work with as part of leadership development programs and as part of team building pieces, is that the most important thing is to show up and be honest and open, and to, be graceful and have a certain amount of humility and good humor in these conversations, because we will all get things wrong. We will all say things that probably weren't, well articulated. And that is, that's being human. But what happens is when we try and cover up that behavior, is it makes it much more difficult to really move the conversation ahead and to get to the crux of issues and to re-educate ourselves and each other on what is okay and what isn't. So we need to be willing to kind of come to these conversations knowing that they will sometimes be uncomfortable and messy and awkward, and that that's okay. It's part of the learning journey, and that we're all on this process of trying to create equality, trying to create more participation and representation of not only women, but just diversity in general, and that we're committed to that end game.
Yeah, no, so useful. And I think it's really important, as what you're saying. This isn't just a female conversation. Probably more so, we actually need the conversation to be had by men, and create the male allies and the male champions of change, is what there are organizations out there doing. Because, generally in male dominated environments, there are probably 85% minimum of males. So the percentage of females is 10, 15% sometimes at most. So to be able to create that change, you're actually needing to do it from the inside, with males being aware of it and things like that. I know that I spoke at a conference last year, and it was probably 90% males in the audience. And I actually then turned the conversation around. Well, what can you do to help the females in your life? What can you do to help, your wife, work and things like that? And it was funny because I had someone come up to me after it and say, yeah, I want to be a role model for my children. And he goes, I want to be the dad that does also the childcare drop off and pick up. And he said, I really want to do this. And that was his one takeaway that he got from it. Because he said, I went home and had a conversation with my wife after what you're talking about. Because I said I referenced about my husband also does the drop off and pickups. And I said, he's got a busy job as well. And it was interesting that I was hoping that might be just a ripple that we have, but it's also about not telling males what they're doing wrong, but also how they can be part of the conversation to create that change and really turn the dial as well.
Absolutely. And this is it, as you said, spending more time with your kids, that is a win, right? And dads want that. You know, we want this flexibility. We want a much broader approach to our lives and our roles within it for men and for women. And it's about going on that journey together. And if I can just sort of build on what you said from that, you know, personally, so my husband works in the construction industry as well. And he has a real thing about doesn't like to be on calls in the afternoon with the kids in the background. And don't get me wrong, our kids are in like full-time, you know, school or care. So it's not like we're talking the middle of the day, they're running around wrecking havoc while we're supposed to be working. But he's really concerned about people hearing the children in the background. And for me, it's like, well, we have to accept that there will be an hour between 4 and 5, or, you know, when you're taking a call at 5:30, that life is going on around you. And as a man in the industry, I need you to represent, you know, what it is like as a working dad, as much as I represent what it is to be a working mum. And, you know, COVID was good. It kind of opened us all up a bit more to what life is like in reality. But I know the truth is, for my family, is we wouldn't function if we didn't have, you know, my partner doing drop-offs and pickups in the same way I do. We have a pretty regimented routine so that we all get to show up and be involved and do what needs to be done. But we need to be open about it instead of hiding the kids behind the door, hoping no one knows, because that's how we create change. And, you know, the construction industry over the last few decades has morphed into an industry that now works 6 or 7 days a week. And it was never intended to be that way. And the consequence we see is that, first of all, people don't have a break, right? It's a complex, demanding industry as it is. And when you're working long hours, most days of the week, and no time to rejuvenate, you're not showing up for your family, you're not taking care of yourself. And the impacts of that is, as I said, you know, the highest rate of mass suicide in any industry, high rates of divorce, you know, and then we have all the social impacts that kind of come from that. And these are all things that we can fix, right? They're all things we can change if we're all in the journey together. And it's, again, about having these open conversations and talking about when we're struggling and what we can do differently, and appreciating that, you know, not one thing fits everyone. And we need to just work together to find out what's right and kind of create like a toolkit of options that we can kind of pull from when we need to.
Yeah. And it's certainly so much as organizations, males and females, it's not just isolated to one group, but it's everyone doing their part. You know, it's a game of inches. We all might take 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but at least we're creating some movement and some change. So for females that it might be working in a male-dominated environment, as we said earlier, it can be quite intimidating and things like that. And also it might even be a barrier for women to actually enter the industry thinking, oh my goodness, this is going to be scary and things like that. What would be your advice to women that are looking either at entering into a male-dominated, you know, industry such as, you know, construction or engineering and things like that, and also being operating and navigating those organizations? Because it's one of those things, as you said earlier, you do have to have your bit of armor on. There is a element of internal confidence that you also have to sit with, as I said, but it can also be quite intimidating as well.
Yeah. So I think if you are thinking about entering a male-dominated space, the first thing is to realize that there are hugely rewarding careers in these industries as well, right? There's like, as I said, I fell into construction and I just love it. And
I'm the same in the rail industry, so I get you.
Right? So there's hugely rewarding careers there. And also, opportunity has never been better if you're a woman entering into this space. So recognize that and use that as, you know, part of your evaluation as you move forward. Also, reach out and talk to people. So as I said, the value of loose connections. If you reach out to someone on LinkedIn, you know, not everyone will say yes, but lots of people will be happy to have a chat and share their insights. So have conversations, like have open conversations with people and ask for their insights so that you kind of go in eyes wide open, aware of what the different, you know, roles entail and what the challenges and opportunities and the day-to-day looks like in those positions. And also just recognize these are very broad industries, and there are lots and lots of different roles. And, where you start will not necessarily be where you end. And kind of having that open approach to be on a career journey rather than thinking, oh, I need to find the thing I'm going to do, right? That's not how our careers should be thought of. And be willing to take the risks. Go in, try it. If you don't love it, you might find something else that piques your interest, and be willing to kind of transition and move into that. And I think that kind of feeds into the second part of the question, which is, if you're in the industry, how do you approach your career? And I think the best advice I can give is think about your career strategically. Like, where are you now and where do you want to be? Now, where you want to be will change over time. It's supposed to, it's fine, but it does act as a North Star. So commit to yourself about what that looks like. Allow yourself to dream big, right? Don't be limited to the confines of what you think is possible. Really think about where you'd like to be, what impact you want to have, and how you might best contribute. And then start to think about it as a project. How do you get from A to B? What are the steps? What are the qualifications? What are the experiences? What is the network you need? And then go out and start taking action. And as you said, right, inch by inch, nothing happens overnight, but it's the long game and it's moving in the right direction. And if you've got a North Star up here, you're going to go further than if you just accept opportunities that are presented to you, because that will always be based on someone else's agenda and not your own. So really take that long game view, and think strategically about where you want to go, and be willing to take risks, right? You're going to get things wrong. Things are going to be horrible sometimes. That is life. It is not unique to any particular job or any particular industry, but have that growth mindset. So approach everything with, what went well, what didn't, what could I do differently, and keep learning and keep growing.
And I think also great advice and tips there, Beck. I think also another thing as well, don't be afraid to seek out female mentors or mentors that are going to really support you in your role. I know that there's times that I've probably doubted myself, or I know even going along, like I know about networking or even just a new environment, going into a new office or something like that. If you know one other person, it can make such a huge difference.
Yeah.
And last year, actually, at our rail industry event, I actually organized a female walk the floor activity. And then because it's, 90% male at a rail industry event, and people actually came up. Well, I only had 15 females come up, like do the walk, but a few people said to me, thank you so much, because it is so intimidating. And so I saw a few of those females throughout the conference, and we're able to give each other that knowing wave and things as well. So don't be afraid to seek out, as you said, have that LinkedIn connection and things like that, but don't be afraid to seek out mentors or people are going to help advocate for you, but also a fellow female. So if you're feeling a bit uncertain, a little bit of doubt, you can go, oh, I've had this really uncomfortable conversation, or this really thing. So you've also got your support network. I've found that useful in a very male-dominated environment, particularly early on in my career. Less so now. I definitely, if I'm going to a networking or an industry of something related, if I'm knowing at least one other person, it can give me that element of confidence. And I'm like, okay, it's not so scary anymore.
Absolutely. And it's almost like that anchoring feeling, just knowing that there's someone there if you need to, that you can tap on the shoulder and, have a minute with if you need to. And that's hugely important. And just kind of going back to what we were talking about with, loose connections earlier. So if you think about your support network, you should have in it like the people you can just go to and offload, and they know all your dirty business and the ins and outs of everything. And you can vent to them about a bad day at work or an issue that happened or an opportunity. That close circle, that inner circle, is really vital for our emotional and psychological well-being. But that loose connection, that outer circle, is really important to push us. So when you have a conversation with someone in the industry and explain to them what's happening that doesn't know you intimately, they will have a different perspective and they will see things with a much broader lens and view than you will. And that's where we often see ourselves kind of pushing further ahead, because someone backed us and someone gave us the idea. And that often happens from that outer circle. And that's, again, the same thing as, those women at the conference, those 15 women, you probably don't speak to each other often, but at the next function or the next conference, you'll be saying hello to each other. You'll be going out of your way to kind of, represent each other and support each other. And that is how we grow a community of strong female leaders, by showing up, by supporting each other, by having each other's backs. And, when we think about that outer circle, it's about colleagues in the industry. It's about sponsors. It's about mentors. It's about coaches. It's about what do you need in this stage of your career and your development that will push you further ahead. And, often it's about people that will be devil's advocate for you, or will, question your decisions, or will be your cheerleader and push you further than you thought you could go. And having all those roles represented is really crucial to get ahead.
Yeah, 100%. And you certainly can't do it alone, as we know in motherhood.
Absolutely.
There's none of this is alone, but it's also about your North Star and understanding that getting there and also backing yourself, but also getting other people to pump up your tires at the same time, because it can also be, really important. I know that I was doing that for a colleague a couple of weeks ago. She's early on in her career, and I was like, no, you can do this, back yourself. Don't listen to those people that are trying to cut you down and things. So it's funny, one of those things, I almost felt a bit full circle. If someone says it to me, I then feel like I need to pay it forward to someone else. But it's one of those things that are so important. So just before we finish up, Beck, is there anything else that you'd like to, any other tools, tips, advice, for women that are working in male-dominated environments, particularly working mums, to overcome some of those systematic challenges that they face, so they can actually have a really successful career in these environments?
Yeah. So I think first of all is don't be scared to speak up. Quite often speaking up and calling out bad behavior, it feels incredibly uncomfortable in the moment, but we each need to show up and do that, because nothing will change if nothing changes. And if we sit blindly aside, we won't see the shift in our industry that we need. And I think the other big thing is really around seeking the right support network for yourself. And quite often that is about male allies as well. So think about this. They're not doing you a favor by supporting you or by supporting causes for inclusion and diversity. They are doing that because that's part of what they can contribute to the industry as well. And so don't be afraid to seek people out and bring them on the journey. I think most men, to be honest, want to support, a broader, diverse workforce. And as we said, they want to support more diverse practices and more flexibility. And it's often about just having that personal connection with someone, taking them on the journey, giving them your insights and building that relationship that can help them, often from a position of influence or power, then make and implement changes that will benefit everyone. And so seek those people out, have those conversations. It's not a favor to you. It's part of what we all do. And really just show up courageously and know that you're not alone.
Fantastic. Amazing advice. And I know that you and I could talk about this and so many other topics all day.
Absolutely.
We'll have to come on again. I love when I chat with you. And just quickly, Beck, how do you fill your cup?
Oh, how do I fill my cup? Lots of things. So I think two main things. So one is I have a very regimented practice. I get up usually between 5 and 5:30 and I exercise first thing in the morning. And that's so important for me, because I can tell the difference on the days I train and the days I don't. And it's like that hour out of the house where no one's pulling on me, no one's, needing me. And I just get to take care of my body and take care of my mind. That's vitally important to me. And the other thing is I create time to switch off. So, I try not to work on weekends, but even if I have to, I carve out time to be present with my family. And, I love that time. It's sacred to me, but it's only sacred when I can sit there and enjoy it and appreciate, what's going on around me. So really kind of bookending work days or time with family is really important.
Amazing. And you're also, I know, a busy mum of 2 boys like I am. So any of that crazy time and even that downtime, totally get it.
Yeah.
Now, how can people get in touch with you to work with you and to hear more about what you do with women in the property and construction industry?
Thanks, Karina. So I am active on LinkedIn, so you can come over and find me. I'm Rebecca Bangura. You can also check out my website, which is RebeccaBangura.com, or check out the Building Up Women in Property podcast.
Amazing. Thank you so much as always. I love when I speak with you. There's always so much gems of gold and you're always so articulate in what you're saying as well. So thank you so much. And best wishes for the future. And if you're a woman particularly working in a male dominated space, particularly property and construction, which is a huge industry as well, check out Rebecca. There's so much that's going on in this space, and it's important because also we need more women in this space. Culture, profit, everything has a really positive impact. So thank you so much for all the work you do, and it's having a real impact, I know.
My absolute pleasure, Karina. And thank you for the work you're doing and the Working Mama podcast. I know this is such a safe place to come and have some of these hairy conversations and shared experiences and to support each other and move forward. So thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you for listening to the Working Mama podcast. Subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast catcher. Please also feel free to contact me on any of the Working Mama social channels. Remember, Mama is MUMMA, or website www.workingmama.com.au. I would appreciate you to share this podcast with friends and colleagues, especially those that are parents managing the juggle. And I would really appreciate if you had to take the time out to leave a review of the podcast. Thank you, and see you next time. Have a great week.